Welcome to MarcusG.tv. I am Chef Marcus Guiliano, and I'm a chef on a mission. Today's mission is food activism. What is a food activist? I get this question asked a lot. I like to consider myself a food activist. I like to consider myself a restaurant food activist. So let's start off with some very simple questions here, and then I get these questions asked all the time, and people to explain. So it's a series of about 10 questions that we're going to go through here that are the most commonly asked questions to me about being a food activist. So here we go. Question number 1. What is a food activist? You can do a quick Google search. You can find things. I found this great thing on gatewaygourmet.com. What is a food activist? Some of the tasks required in being a food activist include looking at the following: environmental impact of food production, social impact of food production, political impact of food production, okay, how extensive transportation can diminish food quality, where to find local sources of food that are grown and raised responsibly. That's key, responsible. We can get lots of local food, but sometimes it's not responsible. Just because it's local doesn't mean it's the best. If you're in Newark, New Jersey, Budweiser beer's local. The Budweiser plant's right there. Is Budweiser or InBev the best company to buy from? I don't think so. There's many better options. So that's just a quick example. Advocating for safe, healthy food for everyone. Safe, healthy food for everyone. Now, when that word everyone comes in there, I consider the word everyone being for the people who actually produce the food, to make sure they're not getting chemicals sprayed on them, or there's not some kind of runoff in the water from the farming, from the aquaculture system that's going to be destructive to the local community. And there's a lot of examples of that, like methyl testosterone in tilapia. It's a testosterone. It's a hormone that they use to feed fish, tilapia, and revert the sex to, or change the sex to all males because they convert better. Well, what happens when you have all that methyl testosterone in local water in these communities around the world? Women start drinking it, and especially pregnant women start drinking this water, and you can see the complications going there. If they're changing the sex of fish, what is it happening to the local community? So that word everyone means everyone involved, from the person producing it to the person consuming it to the person disposing of it, okay? Extremely important. And educating communities on what they can do to make positive changes. Gatewaygourmet.com, really great little article there, and there was some bullet points. Experience as a young chef. I've worked at some really nice places across the country. I've worked at the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs, the Greenbrier in West Virginia. I've worked at a little restaurant up here in New York called the Dupuy Canal House, John Novi. Been a food icon of new American food since the early 70s. Worked in London for Le Temps Clair, which is a Michelin 3-star, Pierre Kaufman. So I've worked and gotten some great experience, worked with some really good chefs. But as a young chef, the impacts that were happening, I saw in food production. It was really frustrating when I worked at the Broadmoor, and the Broadmoor is in Colorado Springs, a phenomenal resort. And I would just see the truck sitting outside every morning waiting to unload food. You really don't think of it when you work in a small restaurant, but working at a big hotel that's serving thousands of people every day, that truck is sitting out there. Sometimes there were 2 trucks just sitting out there every morning at 7 a.m. when I went to work, unloading and unloading pallets and pallets and pallets of food. And I began questioning, like, well, where's all this food coming from? How can we just keep getting case after case after case of the same size beef tenderloins, the same size pork chops, the same size as... Where's this food all coming from? How is it being manufactured? Made, manufactured, grown, produced, and manufactured is more the correct term in that. Then I went to work at the Greenbrier, and the same thing, the truck was sitting out there, big truck. But at the Greenbrier, they emphasized a lot on using local farmers as well to supplement when they could. So they would sit down with the farmers every winter, they'd talk about what they could grow, the farmers, and the Greenbrier would buy it. So it was really nice. I worked in the tavern room there, which was their Silver Dome service. And we were the ones who got the top picks of the food there, because they were the ones who charged the most at the Greenbrier. And we had a phenomenal chef, very talented chef in there, Peter Schindler. And he was really into new American cuisine, using local food. So we literally, the executive food purchaser, buyer of the Greenbrier would literally, when he got things, they would literally hand walk things up to us, like right directly from the farm. And we're like, wow, this is really cool. We get this, this, and this. And it was always a surprise what we're getting. Sometimes we didn't know what was coming in. So that was really, really cool. So that's when my wheels started turning. And I was like, wow, all this local stuff, supplementing it in, that's cool. What if we could like expand upon that? I love books. You can see I got a bookshelf back here, and I literally have hundreds of books, and I've been collecting books ever since I went to culinary school when I was 19. So I went to work, or I actually have some books from Raymond Blanc, the chef and owner of Le Manoir in England, in Great Milton in England. Love that restaurant. I went there in '97, but I was reading his books previous to that. And, as early as the early 90s, he's talking about organic food and this and that. And I was like, I didn't even know what the word organic meant back in 1991, 1992, 1993. It was never even like something that chefs would even think of. And he was saying, make sure you use organic chicken livers. And he would explain why, because the buildup of toxicity and chemicals in the liver. And he was just on top of it. And I was like, wow. So that was really now another push. Like, wow, this is something that is a big name chef that's a Michelin 2-star chef. That's really pushing. It's like, this is kind of cool. And but still not out of sight, out of mind, but on the back burner at this point, because not many restaurants are doing it. Of course, Alice Waters has been doing this for years, and there were some chefs that have been really, Rick Bayless. But, as far as consumers looking for this, they weren't really looking for this kind of food yet. They weren't, it was, a new introduction. And so it really wasn't readily available. And if chefs were doing it, they really weren't bragging about it, because you didn't have YouTube, you didn't have Twitter, you didn't have Facebook. You were just, buying carrots from a local farm or beef from a local farm. So it wasn't things a lot of chefs were bragging about, because consumers might have been a little wary. Like organic wine, the longest time they were a little wary. If they saw the word organic, oh, I don't want that. Not realizing that most of the vineyards in France have been strict organic, because they know not to spray chemicals on their land. They're not that stupid, but for them to write organic, why should they? Because they've always been organic. So it's one of those things where, you might have been getting it, but you just didn't know you were getting it, and then all of a sudden now you have options. Like, well, I don't know if I want that option as far as organic and local and sustainable. So when I went to work for Pierre Kaufman at La Tante Claire, he really, really was doing a great job at sourcing lots of local. I remember the farmers would come in every morning, with trays of stuff, and he would actually go fish himself. They were closed on weekends, so he'd come back on Monday after he was fishing and have all this fish he'd bring in, and the fish was so fresh there that was landed that morning from Dover. And you actually had to have the fish sit an extra day, because that had gone through rigor mortis yet. It was stiff as a board. So you couldn't actually serve it that same day. That's how fresh it was and local. And I was like, it was a total different experience. I'm like, wow, we're cooking, at the time it was one of the 24 Michelin 3-star restaurants in the world. So it was one of the top 25 restaurants. And we're serving all this local and high-end, in a high-end setting. It's like, wow, I was like, this is like awesome. That's when all of a sudden I started getting the addiction to it. So that was a really cool experience. Conversations with lots of influential people over the course of the years. And when I got my first executive chef job in 1997, 98, it was in Colorado, and it was at a country club, and first country club experience, by the way. I went right into being an executive chef, not knowing, the whole political scheme of country clubs. This country club in Colorado was really nice. The members were awesome. And I had the ex-president's wife come up to me, Jane Denzinger, and she goes, Marcus, can you get us beef without hormones? And me just thinking, well, why would beef have hormones? And she goes, in antibiotics, can you get hormone-free and antibiotic-free beef? And I'm thinking, well, why would it have it to begin with? So that question right there, that was a question that sort of said, okay, now I'm in charge of the kitchen. I'm not working at the Greenbrier anymore. I'm not working at the Broadway. I'm not working for La Tante Claire. I'm not working for John Novi. Now it's time for me to make the decisions. Now it's time for me to step up to the plate and say, okay, I can make a change. So it was pretty cool, because that's how it started, that one question. And I started now trying to source and asking questions to my vendors. And at one point I sat down with Henry Lovejoy from Eco-Fish. I was one of his very first customers as a restaurant. And Eco-Fish is a great company. It's called Henry and Lisa's Natural Seafood now, and they're in Whole Foods and all these other types of health food stores. They have a frozen line of very sustainable seafood. Well, when he first started out, they were also big into restaurants, and I was one of their first customers back in 98 or so, 98, 99. And I sat down with Henry at a Sustainable Food Summit conference, and we started talking seafood. And that one conversation, that one dinner right there, sitting next to Henry, forever changed the way I looked at everything I was buying. I said to him, he just blew me away with the dangers and the politics of fish production and catch methods and habitat destruction. And I was like, wow. I said, Henry, so I'm going back to the restaurant after this. Give me 3 things I can do that I can change right now. I want to make changes right now. What can I do on seafood? And he gave me a couple tips, and I went back and I went full speed ahead. And that was 1998, 1999. Full speed ahead. And from that point on, I've never ever looked back. It's always been, what can I do next in my restaurant, in my kitchen? What's the next step? I'm not perfect as I am right now. There are things that we buy that I'm not so proud of, but I'm very conscious, and I say, okay, well, if you have a choice of Pepsi or Coke, and here's a good scenario. If you have a choice to buy Pepsi or Coke if you're a restaurateur, that's a tough question. So you have to weigh out all the options. Now, of course, there are other options, but let's say you only had Pepsi or Coke. Well, Pepsi comes from, a big corporation. Coke comes from a big corporation. The Pepsi distributor is owned by a big corporation. Let's say it's a corporate distributor, and then Coke has a corporate distributor, but then Coke also licenses small independent distributors. So if I have a choice to buy from a small independent who owns the business, who actually is distributing for Coke, I would rather buy from a small independent business who happens to be distributing a big brand. So you see, you might never have a perfect situation, but you might have a better situation than buying Coke from the Coke corporate distributor. Support the small guy who happens to be distributing the bigger brand. So see, there's a lot of questions to ask. So the second scenario is not really the best scenario. The first scenario would be the worst, but it's still a better step, because that dollar you're giving, that dollar you're giving goes to a better place. But at the end, it's going to Coke, so it's still not the best place. But so you kind of get my drift on there. So, very influential conversation I had in the beginning. I just went full force ahead. A lot of people know me as a healthier chef or a healthy chef. And when did that come into the equation? Wow. 1999, right after I started this whole thing. My father had a heart attack at the age of 57. His father had a heart attack at age 57. I was 27 and overweight and on tons of medications and asthmatic. And I saw the writing on the wall. And that was the turning point. That was the fulcrum. That was the thing that was the needle that broke the camel's back, or that was what happened. That's it right there. It was, I saw what my history could be. Now, a lot of people say, oh, genes, you have bad genes, you have genes for this, you have genes for this. I think a lot of that is nonsense, and here is the real deal. If you give yourself the bad foods and the bad environment and the toxicity, you encourage the genes to be expressed for cancer or for heart disease. But if you don't give those genes the food or the tools to express the cancer, the heart disease, or whatever it is, they're not going to express it. You can totally reverse that, overcome that, and not even worry about that. So if they say, oh, I have the genetics for cancer, the genetics for breast cancer, if you eat crap and you use deodorant with aluminum and you do all this other crap, you're going to get breast cancer whether you have the genes or not, okay? That's just the way it goes. There's only so much your body can take, and your body is resilient, but there's only so much you can take. So when that happened to my father, I was like, I saw my life flash in front of me. There's the writing on the wall. The wall's pretty big. The history's there. I'm like, I've got to make changes now. And some people say, slow changes, this, that. No, I was on it. I was changing it. Within 30 to 90 days, I was off every single medication. Every single medication I was on. I had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, chronic fatigue. I had acne so bad at 27 that I was embarrassed by all my acne. So I was so toxic. Prescription deodorant because I would sweat yellow. Now I was a chef, so I'd eat the food that I was cooking my guests. Until then, all through the 90s, up until 99, 98, I was eating that toxic food, that fried food, the junk, the sugar, the white flour, the pastries. They might have been world-class pastries. They might have been, 5-star this, 5-star that across the world. But man, oh man, it was killing me and it caught up to me. So once I was asthmatic my whole life too. I couldn't run a quarter of a mile to save my life. I remember the first time I went to the track to run a quarter of a mile, I was dead. If you know me and follow me now on Twitter, you know that if I don't run 6 miles a day, something's wrong and I don't feel good, It's just, I've been known to run over 200 miles a month some months. So, asthma gone, everything gone, because I did everything instantly. The changes happened and people are like, wow, Marcus, what in the world did you do? So, I've been telling my story ever since. Just in different ways, because YouTube wasn't around then and Twitter wasn't around then. But ever since 1999, people said, Marcus, I've known you in the past, I see you now, what have you done? Man, I've told my story, okay? I'm there, I've told it, I love it, I live it, and people can see that. The Gateway Gourmet said, education, educating communities on what they can do to make positive changes. I do a lot of education. I have a lot of videos here on YouTube where I tell people, I really brag to people what I'm about, and people come into my restaurant. I'm on local radio all the time here. I'm on local non-commercial public. I'm on public radio all the time, telling about my experience with food and how for people to make positive changes. And it's great because every month I get emails, hey, I caught this video from you 4 years ago, or I saw your one video on this, and I did more research and it empowered me, and now I'm this and I'm that, and I've gotten rid of this. And I love to hear those stories about how people have changed because they saw my one video on one thing years before or a month before, whatever. It's really awesome. So I'm really into educating. I go to the schools and I educate kids on food choices. I educate people in my restaurant. That's what my restaurant's about. So I love educating people on health, food politics, on the whole thing about being a food activist, and even more than what's just involved in food, which is a common question I get. You're really gung-ho, Marcus, on this. You're really gung-ho, and you go way above any other restaurateur I know, any other chef I know. You go way above. What's the deal? I just simply like to say I'm an overachiever. And here's a great example of being an overachiever. When I was in 5th grade, we had an assignment for the weekend to go out and get mushrooms because it was going to be a little damp weekend, and the teacher wanted us to bring in mushrooms, and we'd go over them and this and that in class, and it was part of science, I believe. Well, we had some rain. We had a lot of mushrooms outside. So Monday morning, guess who comes in with the big sack of mushrooms, the brown sack of mushrooms? That was me. Everybody else had, a little handful, 1 or 2 mushrooms. No, I was an overachiever and I had the whole sack of mushrooms. They were there. Why not pick them? Why not bring them in? So I've always been that person that it's always gone above and beyond what's been expected of me, because that's just the kind of person I am. That's how come I've had a great rapport with all of my employers, and every person I've worked for, I could call them, get a recommendation. If they had a job, they'd totally hire me back, because I've never burnt bridges. I've always been an overachiever. I've always been to work early. I've always had great ethics at work, and I've always produced and I've always delivered. So it's just been great to be able to have that kind of relationship. So I'm an overachiever, and that's what I do at my restaurant. I overachieve, and I never know when to stop on something. It's just like, okay, I have this. What can I do next? What's the next step? So passionate about this. Being a food activist is not enough. If you own a restaurant, if you have control of a restaurant, being a food activist is not enough. You have to do more than just look at food choices. You have to look at the whole restaurant. You have whatever you buy, you have to be an activist on where that dollar goes. Because man, oh man, that dollar goes somewhere, and man, keep it out of the hands of these evil corporations. Take their money, take their power. They don't need the money. Your bar is a huge one. All these farm-to-table restaurants, like Jean-Georges at ABC Kitchen, all these other places, farm-to-table, farm-to-table, farm-to-table. You look at their bar, you go to sit down, and it's like big brand, big brand, big brand, big brand, big brand, big brand. Where is your local stuff? There's places here that are in the Hudson Valley that all this, oh, local this, local that, and you sit at their bar, they have nothing, remotely nothing, next to nothing, that could even be local or independently owned. It all comes from two big distributors that's just a conglomerate. And I'm like, man, I just got scammed coming here. If they're not paying attention to all the details in the restaurant, what are they doing in the kitchen? Are they really paying attention to details as far as where the food's coming from and how it's produced and this and that? I feel like I'm ripped off. Man, if they're taking care of the bar and it's all independent brands and they know their stuff, I feel just such at ease. You know, you go into a place and you look at all the Budweiser products, you see the Guinness on tap. Guinness is owned by Diageo. It's a big, massive conglomerate. They're part of ALEC, A-L-E-C, American Legislative Exchange Council. Do research. Go to alecexposed.org and find out what Diageo, which owns 150 brands, including Moet, Dom Perignon, Lagavulin, Dalwhinnie, Ciroc, Kettle One. These people are undermining your freedom as Americans. Look at ALEC, A-L-E-C, American Legislative Exchange Council, Johnny Walker. They're part of that whole portfolio. You give them money, you're giving up your rights. You're encouraging them to keep being a board member of ALEC and passing specific legislation state to state to state that is benefiting only them. Look it up. I can't get into ALEC on this video, but I'm very passionate about it. When I see big brands behind a bar, it's a major turnoff. Being a food activist in the kitchen is not enough. You got to do it in the whole restaurant. What about greenwashing and people that say what they're doing? You know, we just finished up that little last segment, and yeah, a lot of people are faking it. A lot of chefs aren't doing it. Chefs like to put food activist on their Twitter handle. They like to put food activists in an email, you know, that they might send out. And there are just a lot of fakes out there. People that just aren't doing it. Man, if you're going to write food activists anywhere near your name, you got to make sure you're doing it. And here's a great example. Tom Colicchio, Environmental Working Group. Environmental Working Group sends out an email from Tom Colicchio, food activist. We have the right to know what's in our food. We need our food labeled. Support this, support this. We want to know, give us the right to know. You go to those restaurants and ask, and they're serving GMOs. They don't know. They're serving. If you're a food activist, you've got to walk the walk, talk the talk. Buying sustainable tuna, pole caught tuna from the Pacific Northwest, doing one or two things isn't enough. It's a fake. If you're writing food activist, you've got to do it. You've got to do it. So you figure a big celebrity chef like Tom Colicchio writing that a whole letter from Environmental Working Group. Oh, food activist. He signs it food activist. Yeah, so I should go to his restaurant and be safe. No, I was so disbelieved when I walked into the restaurant. I was asked them about the food and the possible GMOs because they had no clue. And they're serving foods that are high triggers, high probability that are most likely GMO modified, genetically modified. I was like, oh my gosh, that's what a lot of chefs do. There's a lot of fakes out there. You just got to know the right questions, ask questions, and keep telling these chefs, hey, step it up. So, what can chefs do? Get certified. Get certified for anything. Green Restaurant Association, any kind of green certification, because greenwashing, a lot of people say, oh, we're green, this and that. I've seen it happen here locally. You see on websites, oh, we're green. They're using styrofoam to-go containers, and it's just like, oh my gosh, this is just a scam. This is a pathetic scam. If you want to go to a green restaurant, or restaurants that's doing it, go to somebody who's certified. Look, there's tons and tons of lists, because that just means that another agency's looking at them. They might not be perfect again. They might not be 100% perfect, but another agency's looking at them, and hope. Lots of ingredients that a chef should never have in his kitchen if he claims to be, or she claims to be, a food activist. Okay, here's my top list. No commodity beef, no commodity chicken, no commodity pork. Nothing as far as proteins that are raised in a commodity fashion, okay? So none of that feedlot beef, nothing from Montford, nothing from IBP, nothing from Excel, and even their other brands, like their so-called natural brands that they might have. It's just a way for them to attempt just to sort of say, okay, we might be doing the right thing on this line right here, but it's still owned by a big company. It's just, you don't want commodity proteins in your kitchen at all. Sugar. Sugar is one of the worst things. If you're a food activist and you're serving white sugar, especially a big brand white sugar, you're not doing your part. Sugar is very toxic to our environment when it comes to processing. Plus, it's not very fair labor, okay? Not fair labor at all. If you're doing white sugar in your restaurant, you're buying commodity white sugar, you're not doing your job. Flour. There's so many options for good wheat flour, whole wheat flour nowadays. You don't need to go to your vendor anymore and buy General Mills or ConAgra or some just run-of-the-mill flour. The problem with a lot of people's wheat sensitivities is they're buying flour because flour is a storage crop. It has mycotoxins. Mycotoxins can trigger cancer. So wheat's a storage crop, and that's how it builds up the mycotoxins. But it's stored so long that it gets delivered to restaurants rancid. It's on this grocery store shelves rancid. Especially whole wheat flour has a very short shelf life. And you find a good mill that's milling good flour, they'll tell you buy a small amount and keep it in the freezer, keep it in the refrigerator, and don't buy more than you need for a month or so, and we'll grind it fresh for you. And that's what I do. We either grind our own flour or I buy it from somebody who's grinding it fresh right then and there. But typically we grind our own, so I know it's fresh, and I keep usually spelt berries, organic spelt berries, in the freezer, and we grind them from there just like that. That's the best way. So all that rancid flours, everything, get those out of your kitchen. If they're not healthy at all, support a local farm, support a small producer, buy good, clean, quality flours. Cornmeal too, the same thing, same scenario. Buy organic though, because wheat can be genetically modified, and so can corn. Corn's really up on the list there as far as probability that it's going to be genetically modified. So. Dairy, same thing as commodity beef, commodity dairy. There's just no place for commodity dairy. A very, very small place. There's a lot of artisanal cheesemakers out there. There's a lot of things that you can really highlight from your own area, and you really don't need to buy cheese from Europe anymore. You don't need to import cheese. The cheesemakers are here. They're in America, and they're doing a good job, and you should be supporting them. Veal or foie gras, either one has issues. Animal activists. When an animal activist walks into your restaurant and they see veal or foie gras on your menu, major turn off. That's something that you don't even want to get in. And people say, oh, my veal's hormone-free, antibiotic-free, and this and that. And that's something that you just don't want to defend to an animal activist of why you're serving veal or foie gras. People say, oh, foie gras is safe, it's not cruel, and this and that. It's not a conversation you want to get into with an animal activist. It just doesn't go over well, okay? Does not. I've never served veal or foie gras in my restaurant. I don't even, it's been years since I've even been in a place that's even asked me to serve it. Chocolate. If you're a food activist, you should not be serving chocolate that comes from Africa. That's where you have your downright slave labor, your unfair child labor. 9 and 10-year-old boys in the field with machetes instead of in the school. And a lot of these companies do a great job of greenwashing, Calibo, you look on their website, or we're doing the right thing in Africa, this and that, we're building schools, we encourage kids to go to school. They don't own the chocolate farms. They don't employ those people. They just have a factory where the farmers just drop the chocolate off to the actual processing plant. In some countries, chocolate farmers have to sell the chocolate to the government, and the government turns around and sells it. So these big chocolate companies, they want to be making changes in Africa because they have to say that because it's politically correct, but they're not. They don't own the farms, so they're not on the farms. They just own the processing plants. So if you're buying anything from Africa, chocolate-wise, get rid of it. Don't use it. It's a big no-no. Corn syrup. I mean, surprised corn syrup's still even in food, but it's so cheap that it's being used all over the place. There's just a major awareness on corn syrup and trans fats. When it comes to buying food and being a food activist, you have to take care of the whole food cycle. You have to take care of the people who are actually making the food, and to the people who are consuming the food, to the people who are disposing of the food, and everybody along the way. It's just not a matter of saying, oh, I'm going to be very selective and buy something that selective items are not include a lot of the big trigger point items. These are the big trigger point items that I just mentioned. Now there's more too out there. Soybeans, avoid genetically modified soybeans. I mean, the list goes on genetically modified foods. It's about nourishing the whole cycle. And here's a good story. I had a couple stories like this. As a young chef, my first restaurant that I was involved in Colorado, I had farmers came through. One farmer said I saved his marriage because his wife wanted him to go back to, they wanted to move back to Michigan. This was in Colorado. They wanted to move back to Michigan so he could do computer work because the farming thing wasn't working for him. And it was very frustrating. And once I got on board and I was buying from him and I got other chefs to buy from him, he realized that, hey, this is a viable business. And then knew a great friend of mine in Colorado, Jay Frost. If you ever read Fast Food Nation, the gentleman who hung himself in that book was Jay's half-brother. And the farm wasn't working. The farm wasn't working. Jay wanted his kids to get off the farm, go to college, and not look back. After I started our little chefs collaboration there in Colorado Springs, I got all the chefs to start buying from all the local farms. Jay came to me one day and goes, Marcus, this is great. My farm is viable again. He goes, I want my kids to still go to college, but now there's an option for them to come back on the farm and work the farm because the farm is viable. And this is 1999. He goes, the farm is now viable, and it's thank you for doing this. And that's what it's about. It's about not only about pleasing the people who are sitting at your table and giving them good food. It's about pleasing the other end too. And my major thing with farmers, I never negotiate price. I never. If you're a farmer and you know what it costs for you to make something, produce something, grow something, and make a living, I'm not to question that. It's my job as a chef to buy it and perceive the value to the guest. And that's where I have to tell the story. I have to hype its value, and I've really got to emphasize and market that with your product for what it is, so I get the extra $1, or extra $2, or extra $5, because that's really important. It's not about negotiating with a farmer. I never, ever negotiate with a farmer. It's just wrong to do that. Some farmers have no idea what stuff costs. So I'll say, well, if I were to buy, let's say, basil from a vendor, it'd be $10 a pound. That's just an example. Then if the farmer says, well, I can do that for 10 a pound, then it's sort of like a pricing structure. A lot of farmers don't know what to charge. So a little advice of what you might be paying might be helpful. So, there's a lot of foods out there that just shouldn't be in kitchens, and I hope that little section, that question helped you. Especially if you're a chef, get rid of that stuff. Get rid of it ASAP. These big brands like General Mills and ConAgra, the way to cripple them is stop buying from them. You take away their money, you take away their power. Every time you give them $1, you're contributing to their power, just like Diageo. You're contributing to Diageo's power in ALEC to take away your freedom in America here because they want self-interest laws. And it's not only at Diageo, there's 300 corporations that are on ALEC. And that was in a different section of this video. But take away their money, take away their power. We have many so-called food activists, and we have a lot of food activists who are doing a great job as chefs and really doing the right thing. But man, when it comes to the bar, that's the most underutilized part of a restaurant that people just aren't activists. And I mentioned this before, I just have to say it again. Behind the bar, guys, step the plate up, get all those big brands out, support local. As a restaurateur years ago, there's so many great American vodkas. I had all these great craft vodka distilleries at my bar, tons of them. And people would come in, I want Grey Goose, I want Absolute, I want Kettle One, I want Belvedere, I want this, I want that. And it never gave the other guys a fair shot. It never gave them a fair shot. And it was hard to convince somebody, well, I want my Grey Goose, and maybe next time I'll try Tito's, or I've heard about Tito's, but let me just stick with my Grey Goose for now. So as an answer, I came back and said, you know what? All imported vodka's gone. There's not going to be an option for Grey Goose. There's not going to be an option for Absolute. It's just not going to happen. Now I got to really step up the plate and really have to educate my guests and say, this is the vodkas we have. These are your choices. You go to a restaurant and the chef always has his choices of food in the kitchen. Why can't the bar have their food, their choices? Why do they have to go mainstream and just look into a big book and say, oh, everybody wants Grey Goose? Just because everybody wants Grey Goose doesn't mean you have to serve Grey Goose. It doesn't mean that at all. Same thing with beer and same thing with wines. There are so many small independent producers, importers, distributors out there that have phenomenal little portfolios where you can buy really value wine and make some good money as a restaurateur because you're not competing with Yellowtail and Mondavi, and people can't price compare it to a store. So you can give them something that's really a great wine that's not going to advertising. When you buy Yellowtail and all these things, you're getting ripped off because of the advertising too. These companies spend millions and millions of dollars in ads, Absolute, Grey Goose, to try to convince us this is what we want, this is what we need. Man, just get something that supports a small family, an independent family, whether it's a brandy, whether it's a wine, whether it's a beer. And my philosophy is, when you give me your dollar, I want that dollar to go to an owner who's paying for dance lessons for his daughter or Little League for his kid, not to a big CEO's third vacation home. I'm not saying we don't all have rights to make money and have good jobs, but man, if you have a choice, where's that dollar best go? And that being a food activist is part about understanding the whole cycle of the whole restaurant and that dollar and how it trickles back down. So I made an example before how if you're in Newark, New Jersey, Budweiser's local. That dollar's not going to trickle back down to a family yeah, they're employing people, it's jobs, but that's all they're doing. I want to support companies, whether it's a farm, whether it's a distillery, whether it's people who do my printing, whatever it is, that are in a small community that are making a viable job, a viable business, and supporting jobs, and they're doing the American dream. And it goes way beyond America too, because if I'm going to buy cognac, I want it from a small producer. I don't want a big conglomerate. And that's what being an activist is about. It's about managing the ethics, the morals, my responsibility, the nutrition, the health, and really the dollar's king. So it's where that dollar goes is what you vote on, and that's how you vote. And that's what being an activist is about, making sure that dollar gets in the right place. I'm Chef Marcus Guiliano. Thanks for watching this video. I had a lot of fun doing this. A lot of great things on here. If you have any questions, tweet me. So drop me an email, ask me questions. If you like this video, click like, subscribe to my channel, which I do all kinds of videos like this, and please share this video.